Hello, it's Gui Costin, and I had the pleasure of interviewing Jim Stagnitta and JC Glick recently. They are the co-founders of Prodromos. It's a coaching company all about leadership, and I will just tell you, these guys really think differently about leadership. They work with a ton of NFL teams, a ton of Fortune 500 companies, and they really know how to coach, and they're so thoughtful about leadership. We're so proud at Dakota to have had the chance to interview them. You're gonna love this interview. Hello everyone, it's Gui Costin, and welcome to an interview with the team from Prodromos. So I'm joined by JC Glick and Jim Stagnitta. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
Love having you here, this is great. So what you're about to see in the next 30 minutes are some of the true innovative leaders as it relates to coaching and coaching leadership. They have great backgrounds, I'm gonna have them go through it, but this is a very different approach to leadership, and they built a great consulting firm to focus on that. So JC, just a little background on yourself.
Yeah, so I retired from 20 years of service about 7 years ago in the Army, primarily special operations. I was fortunate enough to do 11 combat tours and served with the Rangers and a group called the Asymmetric Warfare Group. I left the Army after leading the Army's training and doctrine leadership school, resiliency school, and fitness school. And what we were trying to do there is become more innovative in how do we teach our leaders to lead, and how do we get people to think about developing as opposed to meeting a standard. Got out and I did what all special operations guys do when they get out of the military. We write books.
Here, baby.
That was the first one, yep. So wrote a couple of books, but linked up with Jim through lacrosse and realized that there was more impact that we could make together, specifically in the sports world, but also in corporations, in taking what Jim learned from all his years on the sports field, combining that with what I learned on the battlefield, and combining those things to something that people could action right away, not just bumper sticker leadership, but actual actionable items that they can put into their own practical use. Because sometimes that's really hard. How do you take what a sports coach does and action that if you work in a cubicle? How do you take what an Army Ranger does and action that if you're working in a warehouse? Well, we try to help you do that.
Great. So just one comment just about what JC was just talking about. So my name is Gui Costin. I'm the founder of Dakota. We're a 60-person firm. We're in the investment business where we raise money, and then we have a software product. But importantly, with 60 people, and we have over 30 salespeople, it requires a lot of coaching and training. And how do you take individuals and how they spend their time during their day to be the most productive for themselves and grow themselves? And then, of course, how do they advance the company? So with that, Jim, welcome. A little background on yourself?
Yeah, so as JC said, his background is military, and my background is sports. And we have both led, but we've led in different arenas. I was a college coach for upwards of 30 years. I've coached in the professional league and continue to coach professionally now in the PLL. I've coached at the Division III level, at the Division I level. I was an assistant right here in Philadelphia at my alma mater. It's where I started at the University of Pennsylvania. I left college coaching about 7 years ago when my son went on to college to play himself. And at that point, I actually put a team together that was a team that would be able to work with corporations, organizations, teams in all areas of development, right? Everything from the mind to the body to the leadership piece. And JC was my leadership head at that point. And a few months into it, we had a conversation, and JC felt like I could take my 30 years of coaching experience and share that and use that if we teamed up to help people in ways that are sustainable, right? Which is really a key piece to who we are and how we go about our business. What really drew me to this was my experience as a young coach. I was maybe the youngest head coach in the country when I was first hired at Washington and Lee, and was aware of the fact that I needed some development, I needed some help. There was still a lot for me to learn, and a lot that people could provide for my players. And during that time, I found very little of it to be sustainable. I found it to be a quick hit. I found someone to show up for a day or two. They tended to assume they knew what our challenges were before they got there. Most of the programming that we did was templated. And
you mean this is when you brought in consultants?
When I brought in consultants, gotcha. Yeah. And what I did find out at the end of the day was, again, none of it was sustainable, and they weren't there when I really needed them, right, in real time. So that's what JC and I have really focused on in our approach, is becoming part of a team, embedding ourselves with an organization, embedding ourselves with a team, which is what we did as in our professional lives. As JC is a ranger and a leader, and me as a coach.
The questions matter, and you have to ask questions with only the intent to learn, right?
Love that. Yeah.
That's it. And I think, it's interesting because we might agree on the principle of the players know, but you have to ask the right questions, because what the players know, and again, let's look at how they've been conditioned their whole lives. Who were the captains of teams? The best players, right, not the best leaders. That continues in the NFL. And I'm going to tell you that I actually called Jim the other day because we were talking to an NFL player, and he gave me an answer that was the best answer. I mean, we've worked with the NFL for 7 years now. We've never gotten this answer. And I said, what's your role as a leader on this team? And without even thinking about it, he goes, to make everyone around me better. We have never heard that in the NFL or the NBA since doing this. It's the best answer a leader can give.
Wow.
Now, I will tell you that is not what most teammates think that their leader needs to be. It's what they need. So you have to ask the right questions. You can't say, hey, who do you think the best leader on the team is? Because what they're probably going to tell you is who the best player is. What you really want to say is, hey, who do you think really takes care of you out there? Hey, who's always the last at practice? Hey, who's putting themselves in a position behind others? So asking those questions, I agree, I think they know.
Yeah.
But you got to ask the right questions. And what we constantly see with leaders is they're asking questions and they're either not giving people the opportunity to answer them because they pause. And instead of just being comfortable with silence, right, we think we need to fill it. Or they're asking questions that they already know the answer to, which is, again, look at the conditioning that we've had, right? When have you ever been asked a question as a child that there wasn't an expectation of the answer?
Is there one sort of core set of challenges that most organizations have that you guys can go in and help solve for? Is there a kind of a consistency?
Yeah, like Jim was saying, I mean, we come in and a lot of consultants will come in and tell you everything you're doing wrong. We're not there to tell you everything you're doing wrong. We recognize that your workforce has been conditioned over their entire lives to behave a certain way. And that's the one thing that all of you all face, that every company has, for example, leadership always complains about collaboration. Well, we've conditioned our children for 18 years not to collaborate. Keep your eyes on your own work. Don't share your answers with anyone else, right? We don't grade people on group projects. We grade people on, maybe you have one group project a year if you're lucky, but that's not real life. So we've conditioned people to be the way they are. So you're not a bad leader or have a bad culture because your people don't collaborate. You just haven't spent the time to decondition them, to get them away from that. I also think that when you look at the other pieces that people they all want to do well, but how do you treat them when they mess up? Because depending on that will allow them to just do what they're told or to go beyond that. So I think a lot of it is just understanding that good leaders, bad leaders, we're all facing the same kind of conditioning that's been bred into our workforce.
Yeah.
And what we have to do is teach them, okay, there's another way to think.
The way that I think a lot about leadership and coaching our team is that you're basically starting with the end in mind. And I always say that if I'm going to coach you on something, right, I'm trying to put you at the highest level of professionalism, meaning everything we're going to talk about, we're going to ask you to do is in your best interest for your professional development. And if you can always make it all about them, so you're saying not just the physical equipment, but also, of course, the mental, right, decision making, what they should be thinking about. And that's what true coaching is, right? Because if you can do that and coach them the right way from the beginning, right, and develop them, right, they're going to become amazing soldiers, amazing salespeople, amazing players.
So, one of the, whether you're in the military, you're on a sports field, or you're in a business, right? One of the challenges that we find that leaders face is that their people are obedient, right? And when I say obedient, I mean they just do what they're told, right? And leaders tend to think that they have to have all the answers, right? When really what we should be doing is developing the capacity in our people, right? Giving them the tools, resourcing them to be able to handle situations without having to come to the leader to get the answer. And examples in sports is you can come out of a coach can call a play, and the defense or your enemy has a vote, right? They can come in, they could double team the receiver, they can come out in a zone instead of playing man to man, right? And if your teams are obedient, they're just going to go run the play that the coach gave them. If your teams develop capacity, they're going to be able to handle the unknown. They're going to make the adjustment. They're going to make the decision, whether it's a sales team, right, or whether it's a sports team, or it's a military team in action. You want to prepare your people, right, to be able and give them and empower them and resource them to be able to make decisions, to develop, and in turn develop the next level of leaders coming up with them, behind them. And the question we ask leaders all the time is, what is the goal of leadership? And the goal of leadership is to make the team better.
So what I love about their coaching and how I think it can be so impactful to a team and organization is you guys think so differently about leadership. Because if you think about what you're just getting at, that term different, is that I can remember I coached my son's golf team for 9 years, and I took it seriously, but I played college golf. And today in college golf, if you ever watch it, which is mind-numbing, it's a 6-hour round of golf, and the coaches literally play the game for the players. Right. So my son was like 11 or 12 years old, and I just made a commitment that I could only say 2 things to him: great swing, great shot. That was Johnny Miller's line. So Mac, one day as we're playing, he's like 11 or 12, and he's like, "Dad, what do you think, bump and run or flop shot?" I'm like, what do you think? And he goes, no, just tell me, like, what do you think? I'm like, but then when you're going to be in this situation, okay, I'm not going to be there. You got to make a decision. He goes, can you just one time tell me what to do? So I always took that philosophy of, right, and it's we as a family, we call it figure it out, right? We have another word in there, but figure it the blank out. And it's all about that figuring it out. So giving them the capacity to figure it out. And I think the strength of what these guys coach and what's such a difference is just how you teach leaders to think like that. And I'm just telling you, it's not intuitive, right? Because leaders do, like, especially insecure parents, just want to make every decision for their kid.
Well, and we're so afraid of watching our children, our employees fail because we think the consequences are so great. And I was very, very fortunate to have a really great commander. And I was going on my 5th rotation to combat. And he asked me what my goals were. And I said what I believed at the time, which was, I'm going to bring all my guys back. And he goes, stop. That is a stupid goal. And I was like, okay, I've been told since I was a cadet, that's what my job is. And he goes, you're going to think you have everything right. You're going to make a mistake at some point in combat. And the cost and consequence of that mistake will be one of your Rangers' lives. And I'm going to tell you that if your mistake is not born of negligence, meaning you should have known something or you should have read something that you didn't, it's okay. And that completely changed how I looked at mistake making. Here's this guy who made it to 4 stars and commanded a very high level. And he just told me that it was okay if I made a mistake, even if the cost was a Ranger's life. I later understood, and there's more to the story, that I understood, why that was important as a warrior. But it really has me look at the civilian world and leaders very differently. Like, if this guy could say that I could lose a life, and if it wasn't born in negligence, it's okay, then isn't it okay that my kid gets cut from a team every once in a while? Isn't it okay that they maybe fail a test? Isn't it okay that they blow a sale? I mean, can we really look at these things in context and say, okay, maybe we've taken this, no failure, zero failure idea, and we've taken it a little too far.
When you look at Jeff Bezos, okay, obviously the founder of Amazon, the genius, okay, of his core principles, okay, and sort of that North Star based on the core principles, and they aren't like the off-the-shelf core principles. They're like really, really well done. We've done it at our organization. So can you talk about one key takeaway that you would leave organizations with that they're probably missing today is either a core philosophy of leadership or those core principles that they stand by, that how important that is to have that down in writing, because that sort of galvanizes everybody against it, right? We have these concepts of walk the 8 feet. We grow apples, we sell them to apple buyers. We don't try to convince orange buyers to buy apples. Throw your hat over the wall. Don't go cowboy. Tap into the collective resources of the team. We have all these Dakota-isms that guides everybody. Could you talk about that? Because when I think of working with a consulting firm on leadership, what would be some of the tactical key takeaways that you would leave, that you leave an organization with, or on a continuous basis that you establish for them so they can follow that?
Sure. Our tagline says it all, right? People over everything. We believe that, if as a leader, if your people trust you, if they believe you have their best interest in mind, they will do anything for you. And creating that culture and creating that environment can be really uncomfortable for leaders, right? Leaders giving up ownership, leaders allowing their people to make decisions and sometimes fail and learn from those decisions. But we believe that when leaders take on and embrace that approach, there's sustainability and consistency in the outcomes for that company. So, we believe that leaders have certain traits. And one of them that we help develop is curiosity, right? So the leader's not just coming from his own personal or her own personal perspective, because that's your own story. That's the story in your head. And you usually go to the worst case scenario with that. Unless you're curious and you actually learn and try to find out, right? Sometimes it even happens with our children. Sometimes, my children do some things and I shake my head and go, why would you do something like that, right? And then when I truly ask, hey, tell me why you did that, there's some real merit in why they made that decision. And we have to be willing to do that with our people. And we have to empower our people and give them ownership. And we don't look for change, we look for evolution. People don't like change, right? But they will evolve. And this can often, when you're working with us, we're going to challenge you. That's what we're there for. And it can often be uncomfortable for the leader to give up some power and to give up some ownership and to allow his people to make mistakes or her people to make mistakes.
So let's dig a little deeper on that concept of curiosity. Because what I think you said maybe a different way, it could be about asking questions, right? Exactly. I just heard my wife mention to me yesterday, she read again, back to Bezos, he said you have to go 6 layers deep within the organization, right? So if you think about institutional knowledge within a company, right? If you're a leader and you're not asking questions of that person who probably has the answers, you've just never asked that they feel uncomfortable speaking up. So you have to dig, right, to get to the answers. Can you talk about that? Because that to me, if you're talking about one key distinction of working with you guys, if you could just get the leaders to be curious, to ask the questions.
Well, there's 2 parts of it too. They have to be authentic in their curiosity, right? They have to have humility. They have to actually be willing to listen, to understand the problem, okay? Not just, listen for the sake of listening. Because when you do that, and you are authentic, your people will start to give you answers, and if you act on them. But we talk about it all the time, and there's, if you sit in a room full of people, whether it's a sports team or whether it's a corporation or a sales team, and you ask them a question. What happens if the person that you're trying to sell to gives you this answer right away? Okay, what you're going to get out of 90% of the people in that room is something negative. Right? And when you do just a little test of probable versus possible, right? This is only probable, but this is possible. You find out that the percentage of that being finding a way to make that a positive is much higher. So, being curious is, if you're not curious, you're only coming from one perspective. That's your own. And it's it's your own story. So getting people to understand and ask questions at every level, right? Getting them to ask questions, it also helps you to understand how people learn, how they develop, how they think. Right?
So this is so interesting because I have two kids that play college lacrosse. Obviously, Jim, you did. You coached college lacrosse for 30 years. But there was always this line from either John Nostern or Paul O'Grady, and they always talked about how you select captains, right? And they would always say, the players know. Like you ask the players, they know who the best leaders are. They know, right? So if you're not asking the players, right, what they're thinking, right, or the salespeople, the frontline people, and you're not asking those questions just to get their opinion because they're out there and they're observing, and then to appreciate those opinions too. Because the thing that I don't like to do at all is that if someone has an idea, either saying no or squashing it, or understanding why, like what was the vein they were going down, right? And maybe we end up getting to a little bit better answer without saying that's a bad idea or no. Coming to the end, I do want to talk about, because it's one of my favorite topics. I love sales. Sales is all shades of gray. We talk about organizations, because really what I want to get out of you guys, and as we close this out, working with sales teams can be invaluable for the sales leadership. I want to be really clear about that, right? I also believe it's where it's the most hardened, and also where people feel so threatened, right, is changing their sales process. But if they have this willingness to be a lifelong learner and get better, the results can be exponential. So if you're a sales leader, and this is kind of the section we want to talk about, walk me through why, right, when you think about working with other groups within an organization versus just the sales leadership team or sales, right, why it's so difficult, and then what you believe you can do to help sales leaders.
I think a lot of times salespeople are like individual sports guys, right? They rely on themselves. They produce for themselves. And when you have an organization and you have a culture, it only takes a few people within that culture, right, to take it down. So when you have a culture and then you have a sales team that is based on individuals, right, in individual production and reaching certain goals and receiving certain honors, it's contrary to the rest of the culture in the organization. And this is another one that is really a challenge. We have been successful, not 100%, right? Sometimes it's hard to break that, and that comes from the top, right? If the leader and the CEO is not willing to look at sales as something that is more transformational in relationship than transactional, we're going to fail. And that's the challenge. Can we get sales teams and CEOs to understand that the transformational aspect of sales should trump the transactional piece of sales, right, if that makes sense?
So really what you're getting at, first off with sales, it does have to come from the top. And it is difficult. We were talking about in our pre-discussion about how tough it is to sort of unpack like something that's already existing within a sales organization, right? But what I would encourage you as a sales leader, and you're thinking about it, these are such worthwhile conversations, because just the smallest little changes can have such a big impact. And I think what, Jim, you were just getting at is every situation is going to be a little bit different, but getting in and analyzing what's really going on and have a consulting group like yourselves that can facilitate that, I think it's worth its weight in gold.
I mean, here's a piece, Guy, that's really, it's uncomfortable, right? It's that capability versus capacity piece, right? Capability is a learned, right? Capability could be a script that you recite on a sales call. But when there's some pushback, you need capacity, right? You need to be able to adjust and handle, in real time. That's where resilience comes in, right? Real time challenges. If you just continue to follow the script and push in this direction, you could be going completely off where where your prospect, needs you to be. And, we'll run into, very capability-based sales teams where we try to, instill the idea of capacity, right? And being able to think on your feet and make adjustments and actually lead the client and be able to provide for them what they truly need, not what you think they need.
Yes, value.
Yeah.
Right, value. So, JC, any comments just as we're talking about sales teams and your approach?
I think that what we do with sales teams, and again, I certainly don't consider myself a salesperson. So for me, it's just really about talking to the sales leaders about why they do certain things and what the benefit they think of that is, especially if it's what I think is contrary to what could get them to the next level. We know at the base of human requirements is a need for connection. It's at the root of everything we do. We have to have this connection. Everybody gets this wrong and they think, oh, we need purpose. People need purpose. People need connection. Once they find connection, then they'll find purpose. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad purpose. But if we start to look at something that separates people, and we see this all the time with sales, right? Hey, here's our number one salesman, our number two salesman, our number three salesman. Hey, that's great. You just put a whole lot of pressure on the number one salesperson. The number five salesperson feels like a turd. Okay, now do you think that that's what's going to motivate them? For some, it will, about a third. But if you said, look, I don't want one great salesman and 4 mediocre salespeople. I would rather have 5 good salespeople.
Right.
So the question is, how do we connect these people in a way that's meaningful so that they can all be successful, they can all lift each other up as they climb, and it's not a threat, it's actually what we want them to do. So asking the questions about okay, so what would happen if we did it this way?
Just give a short background on Prodromos, who you work with, what you do, but then let's talk about the problem that you saw in terms of other consultants coming in and where they basically fell down and what you guys are trying to solve for.
Well, what we do is, we have an approach, right? When people came in to work with me and my teams over those years, they didn't do the reconnaissance, right? They didn't put the time in to actually try to understand and to observe and collect the information that they needed to truly understand where my challenges were and where my team's challenges were. And that's really where we feel like we separate from a lot of people in our space. First, we're not academics. We've actually led, right? We've led in stressful situations. We've led where there are high expectations. We've had to develop cultures. And sometimes we've done it really well, and sometimes we've not done it so well, but we've learned from all of those experiences. And what our approach is and our focus is to actually make or to enact change, right? To help and be involved in these teams as they evolve, right? To be there after hours. We don't have the approach when we talk with our partners. We're not attorneys. We don't charge you by the minute. Once we're engaged, we're there to help you and to support you. Sometimes maybe it's just, you need someone to vent to. Other times you may want, some insights and thoughts. But we tend to engage with our with our partners from anywhere from a month to 6 months to a season.
Gotcha. So at the end of the day, solving one of the big problems is just embedding yourself in the organization and truly trying to understand where they're struggling, what their challenges are.
Exactly.